up, I might talk a part in the letter that's been detected public and invited to one. Cecilia and Mr. Gallup want So that letter's in here too, huh?
Oh, I'm not sure if it is. Whatever was in the email,
It's, I could get it up on my phone.
well, you have,
It should be in the email, though, right?
It was emailed from the same guy that's gonna...
Todd.
David Kensinger has joined.
Thank you.
No, I guess the letter is...
Morning, Dave.
Sorry.
Is there any way we could get a couple copies zipped out real quick or not?
Yes. If
We could start a minute late or whatever.
Okay.
Or Steve could do it.
It should be if it's in the email you guys got it. Maybe it's the same.
Sorry about that, I shouldn't.
No, it's all right.
Chelsea Tremblay is connected.
Thank you. Okay, if there's anybody listening, we're waiting for the clerk to print off a letter that was sent to us, so we'll have it here, but it should have come to all the assembly members via email. So, a couple letters, one from Tracy Welch and another one from...
It was a separate email that I haven't seen yet. So it's printing and Steve's going to bring it in.
Okay. All right, the letters...
We are at the top of the hour.
Okay, will you please start the meeting, Carlos?
All right, sir. I'm starting in 5, 4, 3.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Today is a special meeting to address the Alaska Landless Native legislation, and this is unfinished business from the meeting on Monday. To approve or not approve, or modify and approve or not approve a letter to our federal delegation about the legislation moving forward in Congress, or introduced in Congress. I don't know how fast it's moving, but it's there. So will the clerk please call the roll?
Mark?
Here.
Jeff?
Here.
Dave?
Here.
Jay?
Excused?
Chelsea?
Here.
Taylor?
Here.
Bob?
Here.
Okay, we have 6 assembly members on the line. 3 are in the assembly chambers. Member Mucci, myself, and Member Norheim. Member Stanton Greger is excused. So, with that being said, we have a presentation from the Alaska Natives Without Land, presentation by Cecilia Cavallero. Thanks.
Mayor Jensen, I see Cecilia on the line.
Interesting.
Taylor is texting.
I think they were aware of the meeting time.
It was.
There actually was going to be somebody else was going to give the presentation for Celia, is what I got in the email. So with that being said, so we could, I guess it'd be nice to have the presentation before we even took any public persons heard to be related to this agenda item. So
You take this to see if Celia
Mr. Norheim is trying to reach out to see if the presenter is going to call in, and if not, we'll just move on to persons to be heard related to agenda items. And under that item,
I do have Todd and Teoquia on the line now.
okay, they have called in, so the presenters have just called in, so wonderful.
Carlos, if you could please unmute Mr. Antioquia for us.
Hello, are you there?
Carlos, if you could please unmute Todd Antioquia. Thank you. Oh, he was helping someone else get on the line, it looks like.
Hi, can you hear us?
Good morning, this is Todd. Yeah, this is Todd Antioquia. Good morning. Yes, I can hear you. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, you're coming in very, very clear. So we're at the point on the agenda where you're going to give your presentation.
Wonderful, thank you. Was Cecilia Tablero joined?
She has just joined.
Yeah.
Should I ask for her to be unmuted as well? Here we go.
Yes, please, and thank you. And I apologize, I wasn't sure to hear who I was present. What did I say I was addressing, Mr. Mayor?
Well, it's Mayor Jensen, Assembly Member Norheim, Assembly Member Mucci, Assembly Member Lynn, Assembly Member Kinsinger, Assembly Member Tremblay, Assembly Member J. Stanton Greger has been excused, and our Giesbrecht is on the line, and our clerk, Debbie Thompson, is here as well. So I don't know how many people are listening. This is broadcast on KFSK this morning as well. And after your presentation, we're going to have a section on the agenda that's persons to be heard related to this topic. And they'll have a 5-minute limit to give their input. And that's really not a question and answer situation. That is just individuals or organizations' testimony. So with that being said, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, distinguished Assembly members, and Mr. Manager, clerk, and staff. I appreciate this opportunity, and I'll turn this over to President Cecilia Tablero.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you very much, Mayor Mark Jensen and Assembly members. I would like to bid you a good morning, and hopefully we have a fruitful exchange of information here, which is what I'm hoping to provide more, shed more light on why we're here today addressing you. I have a letter that was sent to you last night. Hopefully you all had a chance to read it. I would like to touch, first of all, on the topic of the public access, which seemed to be a very big, in each community actually, a big concern. And it is in the specific language of the bill. So I wanted to make sure everyone understands that it is of great concern not only to us, but also the users who want continued use of the lands, regardless of who's got the stewardship over it. And number two, the perception that this legislation is quote-unquote being fast-tracked. I just wanted to say that it is not fast-tracked. We've been coming before the Petersburg Assembly to provide a presentation. Nicole Hollingshead and I, we both grew up in Petersburg. We both went to school there, and we both have land there still, and our parents are permanent residents at the Petersburg Cemetery. We pay taxes there, and so family ties are still pretty strong. So this fast track, it's not only been 49 years since we were left out, but in our congressional delegation have been introducing a few times. I believe this is maybe the 5th time we're trying to get this bill passed. the reason this bill is being introduced at the end of this Congress is that the Landless communities, the delegation and staff of the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources were committed to focusing on public outreach before introducing, rather than after introducing the bill. So I hope these collective efforts to engage in community outreach will not be held against the Landless communities. We did a radio blip there. We did make a very short presentation, introduction, Nicole and I, to the Petersburg Assembly. We did intend on coming back. However, COVID kind of changed a lot of things around for a lot of people and communities. So I just wanted to point that out. It is not being fast-tracked. It is the end of the session of the current Congress. So if we get somewhere, great. I'm hoping for a miracle because this has been 49 years. It's true, almost 50 years. A lot of the people who were original shareholders who signed up to Petersburg, no one knew that this was going to turn out this way, that Petersburg would be left out. However, I did mention the last time I spoke with you 250-year contracts with Japan, and that was a lot of logging activity going on in the surrounding area of Petersburg. So that was, I believe, since Congressman Young mentioned that to me in his office a few years back, that was very highly one of the reasons why they were left out. There was already an economic development thing going on in the backyard of Petersburg, Wrangell, and Ketchikan. And we were apparently not to disturb that, so here we are. Now, I did address some of the concerns that I heard during the Assembly meeting on the 16th. I'm going to review the slides. Do you have access to see the slides?
We have copies of them. We have copies of them in our packet. So, and I could.
Oh, okay.
And via email, okay. I could look at it through that too. I believe other people on the Assembly can as well. So, yes, we have a copy of the presentation in color.
Okay, great. I'll briefly touch on these because I know you have other business to attend to. Well, the purpose of this meeting is, first of all, to address the concerns that were expressed November 16th Assembly meeting, and I did provide that letter. From what I recalled, and it was a little retaining some of the comments that were made. Outline our history, Petersburg's public outreach and the community benefits, and request support from the Assembly and advocacy in a letter to the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. We would greatly appreciate that because we totally believe that it will benefit the whole community, not just the shareholders. And who are the Landless people? Well, 2% of Alaska Native communities were not included in UNCSA. Those communities, as you remember, Haines, Ketchikan, Petersburg, Teneke, and Wrangell. Congress can provide a reason why our communities were left out, but all of our communities are unified in going after this legislation to be included. The next slide, Petersburg shareholders by state. We have a total of 624 shareholders, 52 original shareholders, are original. Those that are left, 48% have passed on without recognizing this. We were so hopeful, and I'm happy to know that we were going to be included, and so disappointed when we found out we were left out, and no one understood why. So in the shareholders for Petersburg, about 115 live in Juneau, 113 in Petersburg, 42 in Anchorage, and a number of them sprinkled throughout the West Coast. And the next slide shows the flow chart, actually. The Southeast Alaska Landless Corporation is what we call an umbrella corporation. Each community, Ketchikan, Haines, Petersburg, Teneke, Springs, and Wrangell, has a non-profit corporation also to show that we're unified. So the House recommended that we do this so that we are all in unity approaching Congress with our request. So and each community has two representatives that they send to the Southeast Alaska Landless Corporation in Borough. The prospective shareholders, there are approximately 4,400 shareholders. The reason the number jumped from 3,300 to 4,400 is because of the 48% that passed on their original shares were dispersed to their descendants in varying different amounts, percentages of their shares. And I started off with original, 100 shares. And so we've got advocates working to help us to get this passed. We have campaign volunteer coordinators, we have the Alaska Board and officers, we have Washington, D.C. Council, and we have grassroots advocates in each of our communities. And the Inc.'s purpose was to give Alaska Natives an opportunity to provide for economic, social, and cultural benefits for themselves and their communities. In return, a small portion, less than half of 1%, to recognize Alaska Natives as the indigenous people and federal land claims going back to 140 plus years. Excuse me, I just had to cough. And can we amend INCSA? Yes, we can amend and can amend at the same time. INCSA is a living document. It has had over 100 amendments have been made since inception. And why continue to exclude these communities? With each passing day, the inequity it's getting greater. Impacts of INCSA, the next slide. Impacts of INCSA on board community in the state of Alaska. It's to add new revenue streams to the community spend, tax revenues, infrastructure, new economic development, use of professional services, employment opportunity, and next, allow for balanced conservation and land use. Next slide, legislation process. Continue building a grassroots movement from the foundation of the last 2 years, Alaska Natives Without Land outreach and 49 years of battle for recognition. Refine language with delegation based on community input. Alaska delegation will introduce bills in the House and Senate, and they have done so last week. And hopefully we're headed for a hearing today and markup, or whatever process we are fortunate to advance to. And if this, next slide, if this is passed, where are these lands? So Petersburg's claim is 0.0013% of the total Tongass land and 0.010% of our ancestral lands. Total of 5 communities claims are 0.0067% of the total Tongass land and 0.005% of ancestral lands. Not very much considering there's 17 million acres in Tongass, 23 million in all of Southeast Alaska. And what will be done with the land? Other corporations have provided a template, and they have. It's a different day. It's not all about logging. However, our young people are very environmentally aware of saving our planet and doing things that aren't going to leave big carbon prints. But we've got ecotourism communities that are looking at that. Carbon credits. In order to take advantage of carbon credits, you have to have the timber to do the carbon credits. We understand the process, and Sea Alaska is helping other urban and village corporations gain access to that benefit as well. I believe there's 2 contracts that Sea Alaska does out of California, and sustainable harvesting practices. Low-impact economic development can be achieved. Impact on Petersburg. Well, this is the next slide. Investment in business, the jobs that are already there, and jobs, scholarship opportunity by Family Heritage Foundation. The students will be able to access money to do whatever kind of schooling or trade they want to go to. That's our hope. Business development, For example, we have Spruce Rate in general. That's one of the subsidiaries of Sealaska, and will help folks and get their businesses going. Now, how can I help? This is the last slide. We're encouraging our advocates to talk to your brothers and sisters from the native community, write letters of support, and there's volunteer firms who are looking to recruit folks from the grassroots effort to continue advocating until this is complete, this bill passes. And follow and share our progress on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we do have a website, as stated below. It is www.withoutland.org. And we have oh gosh, these pictures are so beautiful. Please, where are you thinking of this? Thank you. This is all over. I haven't been home for a while since COVID to visit. Are there any questions? Do you have time for questions? Mark?
Oh, yes, there's time. Any questions from Assembly members of the presenters? Anybody on the line? Chelsea, Dave, Bob, have any questions? Doesn't appear like it. So I guess...
I do have a question.
You have a question, member?
Yes, I do.
Oh, this is Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Hi. Can you tell me, you mentioned earlier that this bill has been tried to move forward 5 times in the past. Can you help me explain why it hasn't moved forward before? Thank you.
I don't know that I can. I can say that Go ahead, Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Assembly members. The previous 4 iterations of land legislation to address a recognition of these 5 communities in previous Congresses did not advance, but not for reasons related specifically to their legislation. It really came down to legislative priority, legislative capacity, and so while there were, they advanced at different rates, we weren't able to move through the complete process. And it wasn't as a result of their merits. One of the Landless communities just greatly appreciate the Alaska delegation's ongoing leadership and recognition of how important an issue this is, that they continue to keep it a priority and bring it forth in the current Congress. This is different legislation from some of the previous iterations in that it includes specific land nominations, the maps for all 5 communities, and the reside selections have been shared with the public now for almost a year, and there has been some modifications as a result of that outreach. And I know we really appreciated the Petersburg Assembly for publishing those maps on their website and asking for public outreach some months ago. So there's a lot of hope and a lot of optimism because of the outreach and coordination from the 5 communities and because of the urgency to get this issue resolved, that the time is now to plan to bring this to conclusion.
Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that answer. Another question. You mentioned the 50-year contracts that were established back in the, can't remember when here, but can you explain to me again what those 50-year contracts had to do with this legislation not going forward?
It doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just something that Congresswoman mentioned to me as one of the possible reasons that we were left out because the Forest Service, they were the ones logging and cutting down everything on site. And the United States government was selling it to Japan at a loss. It's going to be subsidized. So, and it's to help Japan get back on their feet after World War II. And that's pretty much as much as I know about it. I've done a little bit of research on it, but it was activity going on, and telling the forest at the time that we were going to do land selections, and we were all those logging operations going on, and so
thank you, Mr. Pitt. I can just add to that, there's any number of speculations related to why the 5 communities were left out of ANCSA. The main thing that we've understood from all the research that's been done over the years from the ISO report that was done to other congressional efforts is that Congress has never been able to articulate a specific reason why these 5 communities were not left out, and that they are the 5 communities many assumed that the other 200 villages throughout Alaska met in order to be recognized at ANCSA. So there just really isn't there's no way to weight one speculative reason over another. It's just that Congress has never been able to articulate why, and that's part of the reason why the Alaska delegation sees the need to really reverse this oversight and correct this injustice and inequity.
I have one more. Just one more.
One more question.
To that. Oh.
Go ahead, Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I do have something to add to that.
Okay, go ahead, and then we'll have one more question from Member Mucci.
I know a lot of folks are wondering, besides us, why we got left out. Originally, one of the parameters to be eligible for inclusion in ANCSA was the native population needed to be the majority in the community, and our communities did not qualify. But at the last minute, there was a change. Urban corporations were created, which the population, as you know, in Juneau and Sitka and Kenai and Kodiak, those are urban corporations. Those were the natives were the minority, but so they had a different set of rules that applied to them, and they were able to form the urban corporations. And that's how we would come in on this bill, as urban corporations and not village. Thanks.
Thank you. Member Mucci?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And on slide number 4, there's something in regards to Petersburg shareholders by state that probably... the question I had is, are those 624 shareholders, are they under the umbrella of a different an additional corporation, or how on that? Thank you.
Oh, no, they can only be, unless they inherited it from a relative. The shareholders are original shareholders to the community that they signed up with.
Okay.
And no one knew.
Thank you.
Sure. No one knew our 5 communities were going to be left out. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from Assembly members? Yeah, I have one question. I mean, I know there's been rough drafts of the maps, and then not too long ago there was a map that came out, and that one did not have the recreation cabins on it, or the marine access facilities, log transfer facilities, and just to see the way the land that has been selected in all 5 of these proposals, who was involved in doing the land selections, and was there any public input outside of the group that was developing the selections? I haven't been aware of any public involvement in the selection of lands. And so, can you explain that to me, please?
Sorry, I made. Let me speak to that. Thank you, Sid. Mr. Mayor, thanks for the question. I would say that there's been significant public output as it relates to the dynamics in land ownership in the Tongass over the last 49 years. There's been so many changes as it relates to conservation designations, to changes in ownership with other states and mental health lands and other private ownership. The landless communities have had to step aside as the dynamics have changed over those years, and what they would have selected 49 years ago would have been vastly different. But they've had to revise and do significant shifts in what they would have selected as those land designations have changed. So there is that aspect to it, and again, there's been multiple iterations, thousands of hours of diligence put into this, and revisions made with each passing year, with each passing change. And so there have been minor adjustments made as we've identified conflicts in this recent map, since what you would have originally seen about a year, 15 months ago when we first started sharing these maps, there have been some adjustments as we discovered some of those items. So certainly work has been done, has been put into it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and I'd like to add to that on the Mark, if I could. My brother Mike Lopez worked many years on this issue, and as many of you know, Dick Keto, Victor Guthrie, Gert Williams, Annie Instead, numerous other people have worked on this issue for years, and they've been involved in map selections. And we did have a land expert, Pete Huberth out of Juneau, come and help with identifying lands that were possibly available for us. And many times we've had to step aside because other folks came in and they got their pick over on the lands, and we've had to wait in line until our turn. And I think that 49 years of waiting is enough. The maps have been redrawn many times, as Todd mentioned, and so that's the people involved in the act who will be the recipients of these lands are the ones that chose the lands. And no, I don't. I'm hoping this goes through. It would be good for the whole community of Petersburg. If there are no more questions, I would like to say that we care about Petersburg. It's our home. No matter where you go, you always have a home. And so Petersburg needs this now, I believe, more than ever because of these trying times. So the benefits of this economic boost would only be helpful to each of the 5 communities, just like all the other corporations have benefited the communities that they're in. And we'd ask you to please join us, include in your letter to the U.S. Senate Energy Committee on Energy and Natural Resources your support and advocacy for passage of our bill. We would be very, very grateful, and I know it will be beneficial for the whole community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Member Mucci.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Member Kinsinger.
Yes. The one thing that struck me on the land selections in the Petersburg area is that they're primarily high-value timberlands. And my concern is that in the past, the lands that were in native selections were logged under the state logging standards, which do not give the same level of protection that the federal logging standards provide. That's my main issue here, is that since these lands seem to be primarily selected for their timber value, would it be considered appropriate to apply federal standards for logging of these lands versus the state standards? I guess that's the question.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Todd.
I think it's rare, and thank you for that question. I would say that one of the as painful as it's been for these 5 communities to kind of stand by these last 49 years and not have the opportunity to have their lands or to create the sort of economic and social and cultural development in their communities, they've had the benefit of history of being able to look to the other 200 native corporations that were recognized in 1971 and see how they evolved, see what's worked and what hasn't worked. As we polled prospective shareholders, there is a very consistent priority within the prospective shareholder base that stewarding the lands in the most sustainable way as it relates to protecting habitat, water quality, to be able to preserve our opportunities for subsistence, for recreating, for gathering of art and medicine, all of the items that are close to our hearts as native people, that those would be the standards that guide us, the values that and the optics that we look through as we consider any sort of economic development on these lands. But the other thing too is that the landscape of how lands can be utilized and developed across any number of uses, like whether it's responsible to timber development, whether it's carbon sequestration, whether it's ecotourism. There's just a much more diverse opportunity for these lands to be utilized. But as native people, as native people that will be stewarding these lands in perpetuity, it's our responsibility and commitment to do so in such a way that's going to honor not only our current communities and owners, but also future generations.
Okay, thank you. Member Mucci, I believe, has another question.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just so I'm sure you've seen the letter that we're talking about, or we will be talking about moving forward here. For us, we are just going to be asking for more time to discuss the provisions. So just so you know, or you probably have the letter, but it appears that's what we're asking for. It's just more time, and just so we can have a little bit more time to sort out all of the intricacies of this legislation and how it affects Petersburg and some of the recreational and commercial uses around town here. So, thank you.
And I could add to that a little bit. And I know this has been a 49-year process to get to this date from the original land claims. But we asked questions of the congressional delegation, Senator Murkowski's office in particular, in August, and we didn't get any firm questions or answers to those questions. And some of them we did, some of them were vague. So when I heard that Senator Murkowski had introduced it, and then Congressman Young was going to introduce it the day after Veterans Day last week, we called Murkowski's office again and talked to John Crowthers, and we finally got some firm answers to some of our questions. And one of them was the conveyance of infrastructure. And there was the cabins, Forest Service cabins, marine access facilities, log transfer facilities, and roads, etc. And I guess why I'm mentioning this is, so it's one of the reasons for this letter is to ask for some more time, because those Forest Service cabins that have been used for, decades, from people all over the world, but mainly from our area and people coming to town to recreate, those would be in the ownership of the urban corporation. So the use of those in the future is a concern, and the public access to those cabins like people have enjoyed in the past. So that was my motivation for bringing this up and trying to discuss it and maybe get, more time to interject thoughts. So that's where this letter came from.
Mr. Mayor, if I might?
Yes. Member Lynn?
Yes. The statement was made that these maps have been available to us for, 6 months plus. That I think I first seen them, maybe 3 months ago. But in the process, seeing them, and was there a formal process where the public could feed back their concerns and that changes would be made before this became an actual bill that was introduced? And that's the question. I have a question for that.
So, Todd, can you answer that question?
Yeah, but thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was again, as we said earlier, the senator and the delegation had asked us to conduct public outreach ahead of the legislation being introduced, and so we conducted numerous outreach throughout the region and again in the interior and down in Florida 48 about the proposed selections, and we received a lot of feedback. We spoke. We had community meetings. We had meetings with a lot of autonomous stakeholders, and did make adjustments as it related to a lot of the feedback. There is, this is the bill is now introduced. There's opportunities to still provide your input. I know the delegation and certainly the Southeast Alaska Landless Corporation is listening intently and considering all of the points that people are bringing forth. So this is a very active time of that listening and processing whether alternatives should be made. And there's a lot of confidence in the what selections have been made, again, because of the due diligence that's been put into it, because of the limited areas that there are access to because of the 49 years that have passed. And I think with the listening sessions too through the last year, the access provisions, the questions related to conservation, stewardship of the lands, a lot of the comments from folks regarding the need for community economic development, and all of those have been really important points that have been considered and applied in this in selecting zones.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on to persons to be heard on this topic?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I just want one kind of comment, if I may, just to an earlier point about the draft letter. I'm not familiar with where the draft is as it relates to what your language is. I understand that you're considering asking for additional time. I would just ask that the Assembly considered the urgency related to this matter. 49 years has been far too long, and literally with every passing day, this inequity mounts. And there are 200 other communities that have been able to benefit from the ANCSA corporations and the ANCSA lands in their areas, where Petersburg has not. And being able to develop those, have economic development, social and cultural programs that benefit the entire community, we just really hope that consideration is thought of, and hope that that you recognize because of that benefit that it is important. We certainly appreciate and respect the input and the continued dialogue, and but we ask that you do support the urgency as it relates to bringing this to final resolution. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you for your input. And you can get on the Borough website and go to agendas, meetings, archived, and so forth, and then go to the agenda for today's meeting, and the information is attached under unfinished business, the letter that we are going to vote on sending or not sending today. So you can, sorry that if you haven't seen a copy beforehand, but that's where you can get access to it, Todd. So with that being said, if there's no...
Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. If there's no other questions, we're going to open the phone lines if there's any callers to speak on this agenda item. Clerk Thompson, are there any callers?
We do have a few callers, Mayor Jensen. Carlos, if you could please unmute Joe Stratman.
Are you there, Joe?
Hi. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is...
And you have the floor, and you're coming in clearly.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Jensen. My name is Joe Stratman, and I'm speaking as a resident of Petersburg. I appreciate today's presentation by Alaska Natives Without Land, and I'm just calling to reiterate the concerns that I voiced at Monday's Assembly meeting. My comments Monday were not in opposition to the transfer of 23,000 acres to private corporate ownership, but rather my comments were specific to 3 parcels. The maps on the webpage for today's meeting don't show all of the parcels. One of the Midcoff parcels in the Bear Creek watershed isn't shown. I think this must be an oversight. But I believe the names for the 3 parcels that are of concern to me are Midcoff Interior 1, Midcoff Interior 2, and Wrangell Narrow South. I've spent a lot of time in these areas. I've hunted, fished, and gathered there. They're areas that I can access easily from my home in Petersburg. And I would respectfully request the Assembly to consider naming these as parcels of concern in their letter to our lawmakers, and suggest that these 3 parcels be replaced by other parcels further away from town with less value to local subsistence users. I feel that these 3 parcels should remain public lands for all to use and enjoy. And thank you for the opportunity to voice my concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Stratman, for your testimony today. Clerk Thompson, will you please unmute the next caller?
Yes, Carlos, if you could please unmute Rebecca Knight.
Hi, this is Becky Knight. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Becky, you're coming in clear, so you can proceed. There's a 5-minute limit on testimony today for everybody. So, okay.
Roger. Thank you. I believe the whole premise for this legislation is flawed, that natives in the 5 communities were unjustly treated. That the natives from the 5 communities were denied status was not an oversight, as the letter states. The record shows that they were quite simply ineligible. It was a deliberate reasoning considered by Congress under ANCSA, not an oversight. I ask that you strike the sentence in the second paragraph containing oversight in the letter, as well as change the last sentence in the second to last paragraph in the letter, because they confer that the 5 communities were qualified. Regarding the percentage of land cited by Ms. Tavallero, or the selections cited by Ms. Tavallero, land in the Tongass, regarding land in the Tongass, it's important to remember that of the 17 million acres, 2/3 are rocks and ice. This legislation cherry picks the remaining prime forest land as well as other important areas for development and would displace existing uses. And I take as an example the area around Bauxite over at Thomas Bay. It's heavily used by Petersburg residents, and if they don't cut the timber down, which remains of the timber in that area, they can put a resort there, and it's going to have a big impact on crabbers and people that use that area. I'd like to read some supporting documentation from similar legislation introduced by the Murkowskis through the years. And the following is 2015 testimony of Michael Black, the Director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, United States Department of the Interior. Quote, prior to the passage of ANCSA, natives in Southeast Alaska received payment from the U.S. pursuant to court cases in the 50s and late 60s for the taking of their Aboriginal land. There's somebody needs to mute their phone. There's a lot of distraction there. Because natives in the Sealaska region benefited from the additional cash settlement under ANCSA, the eligible communities received less acreage than their counterparts elsewhere in Alaska. Congress specifically named the village in the Southeast Alaska that were to be recognized in ANCSA. These 5 communities were not among those named. Despite this, the 5 communities applied to receive benefits under ANCSA and were determined to be ineligible. 3 of the 5 appealed their status and were denied. Notwithstanding the ineligibility of some communities for corporate status under ANCSA, all natives potentially receive benefits from the ANCSA settlement. Alaska natives in these 5 communities are enrolled as at-large shareholders in the Sealaska Corporation. The enrolled members of the 5 communities comprise more than 20% of the enrolled membership of Sealaska Corporation, and as such have received benefits from the original ANCSA settlement. Moreover, it risks setting a precedent for other similar communities to seek to overturn administrative finality and reopen their status determinations. Establishing this de facto new process could contravene the purposes of ANCSA and could create a continual land transfer cycle in Alaska. The next one is from 1994 internal and deliberative briefing paper on the Landless, a previous version of the Landless bill. Quote, the ANCSA criteria for village eligibility was number 1, 25 or more natives were village residents on the 1970 census. Number 2, the village was not modern or urban in character. And number 3, the majority of the residents were native. Villages having less than 25 native residents but meeting all of the other criteria could be determined eligible as a, quote, group with a smaller entitlement. The 5 Alaska communities of Ketchikan, Wrangell, Petersburg, Tennessee Springs, and Haines failed to meet one or more of the criteria and were not included on the list of eligible villages. The at-large native shareholders have in some cases received larger direct cash payments from these sources. And then also the next is from quotes from Undersecretary General Lyons, Department of Interior, and Assistant Secretary Sylvia Baca, 1996. There is no equitable or legal justification for congressional recognition of landless natives in Southeast Alaska or elsewhere as new corporations under ANCSA. We conclude this because each of the 5 communities was considered for village status and formulation of ANCSA, none met the general statutory criteria. And I'm running low on time here, but I skip a little bit. Lee Gorsuch, the director of ICER, in 1993 wrote a letter to Amy Miller at Campus Gay correcting a report she did. And he wrote, we did not, as you reported, make a finding that Congress had inadvertently omitted to study villages from land benefits. Nor did we recommend that Congress should own land. did not, as you implied, say the study villages were entitled to the same economic benefits
Your
of Southeast
time is up,
communities
Ms.
with
Knight.
village. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Will the clerk please unmute the next caller?
Yes, Carlos, if you could please unmute David Beebe.
Hello, Mr. Beebe, are you online?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming in clear.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Good morning. My name is David Beebe, and I represent long-standing and universal concerns for the social, cultural, economic, and environmental crises stemming from America's and Alaska's racist and genocidal histories. It is disappointing to hear constant references and percentages to 17 million acres, as Becky has just pointed out, two-thirds of which is rock and ice, and not at all where our primary concerns lie, but rather see Alaskans hammered industrial tree plantation landscapes across Southeast. To light politic is not commensurate to the threats imposed by the reigning corporate political economy and the threats those pose to our commercial fisheries and tourism-based mainstays of economy. There is no need to own these lands to participate in those sectors of the economy. We now know for a fact multinational corporate extractivism as an economic policy of no recourse has not been working for most Alaskans, but most certainly enriching foreign and non-resident shareholders and multinational corporate executives. We know for a fact the proposed amendment duplicates the same failed policies of multinational extractivism at all costs, and that it has been sealing the fates of our present and future generations residing in our world-renowned temperate rainforest. There are decades of well-documented, peer-reviewed sociological, ethnological, and anthropological research proving beyond any doubt ANCSA's capitalist corporatization and neo-colonial plantation model foisted on indigenous tribes of Southeast Alaska has inflicted profoundly negative impacts on Tlingit, Taina, and Sunshine culture, as well as their social, economic, and environmental well-being. The Alaska Corporation's $500 million investment in their so-called Southeast Alaska Landless Corporation has invoked the notion that the expansion of the ANCSA model to the Petersburg Borough will somehow rectify the, quote, human rights, end quote, issue already manifest in every ANCSA Native community in Southeast. It doesn't take a PhD in political science to figure out this is not a sustainable economic and environmental model to impose at all social costs. For Alaska Incorporated to have such a direct financial relationship to Senator Murkowski's political and personal financial success and vice versa is the quintessential quid pro quo of the political economy of banana republics and third world countries. Representative Don Young's 46 years in the House and Murkowski's family's 4-decade reign in the U.S. Senate owns full responsibility for our current protracted state, national, and international failures to lead during the present perfect storm of converging existential crises. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists' doomsday clock is unequivocal. We are now at the threshold of self-extermination. The hands of the clock are at 100 seconds to midnight. The threats comprise nuclear brinksmanship, catastrophic climate change, and a global threat multiplier, cyber-enabled information warfare. We warn that this is not just because these threats exist, but because our leaders have allowed the international political infrastructure to erode. Alaska's delegation's leaders
and their refusals by denying climate science, by enabling the denial of medical science, and by refusing to change failed economic policies makes them directly culpable to Alaskans unfolding economic, social, and environmental crises, which has put Alaska on the brink of failed state status. Please consider these proven human costs to this economic paradigm. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for your testimony today, Mr. Beebe. Is there, excuse me, anyone else on the line, Clerk Thompson, that would like to speak?
I believe so, Mayor Jensen. It looks like we have one more caller. Carlos, if you could please unmute Joe Sebastian.
Hello.
Good morning, Mr. Sebastian. You're coming in very clear, so you may start your testimony when you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Pretty early for everybody.
You're actually a little bit...
This Landless Compensation Act is being pushed as an emotional issue by tribal factions that somehow fell through the cracks and were left behind the ANCSA 1971's Act. But behind the emotional pleas is a wall of money. See Alaska is a mountain of money, $500,000 behind this cause. One could easily surmise that See Alaska Timber Corp is standing in the wings, and if this bill passes, standing there to log, sell, and distribute the cash that the collective 100,015 acres might provide. See Alaska is one of the most ruthless timber operators in the United States because they operate on private lands. They are not held to operating standards that others must regard. Many of their clear cuts were visible from a spacecraft in outer space, and I've said in previous letters about See Alaska's large-scale industrial clear cutting that it looks as though we are trying to murder the very earth itself. That's how devastating and big these things are. Lisa Murkowski, not being satisfied with funneling 68,000 acres of almost the last prime timber stands in southeast Alaska to See Alaska, lands that were outside the ANCSA box of 1971, now wants to add another 115,000 acres of so-called landless lands to sweeten the pie. And that's why See Alaska is trying to shepherd this bill through. And it's kind of a wolf behind a little lamb, is what it appears to me. There's an old saying about returning to the well too many times, and eventually you find that the well's gone dry. And I truly am sorry that the so-called landless tribes are being used as pawns in a larger shell and pea land game by Senator Murkowski and See Alaska. It truly is awful to watch, and I am truly sorry. But the truth is, beyond the emotional pleas, this Landless Compensation Act has a bad smell to it, and is better left to find its own way without a yay or a nay from the Petersburg Assembly. Like I said, there's a wolf standing behind the little lamb, and it's just not a pretty picture. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak on this issue, and as always, this has been going on for years and years, and it would be nice if this was the end of it. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for your testimony today. Clerk Thompson, are there any other calls?
There are no other callers, Mayor Jensen.
Okay, then we will proceed to the next item on the agenda, which is unfinished business. Unrecognized Southeast Alaska Native Communities Recognition and Compensation Act. Before us today is a letter that we talked about in our assembly meeting Monday, and we voted to not approve sending it to, excuse me, wrong to the congressional delegation that day. So we wanted more time for public input. So we've had a testimony from the Landless Native group and public comment. So, excuse me, I'd entertain a motion to send this letter as drafted to our federal delegation.
So move.
Second.
Motion's been made by Member Mucci, excuse me, seconded by Member Lynn. Any discussion? Member Norheim.
So there's a couple things here. In regards to, and I know we've all hopefully read the letter that was sent to us, that this land was selected for its high timber value, but as was explained previously, I don't know if the callers were listening, but that timber needs to exist first. It must be good timber in order to get the tax credits that the tribe is hoping to pull out of it. Not to cut anything down. At least that has never been in any of the meetings. Every time it gets discussed, it's tax credits. Because we don't see, as you keep saying, clear cutting anything as being overly helpful, especially here. And the one comment, I give the tribe less valuable land. Really? Wow, that was a comment. I'm pretty sure that that was done over and over again, and the Cherokee are now in Oklahoma because it was the least valuable land they could possibly find. I don't think it's asking a lot that the local tribes maybe get something that's at least semi-valuable. As you said, there's a lot of rocks out there. I hope you weren't implying that we should give the tribe rocks. That is quite a statement. And let's see. In regards to that, the federal delegation originally already excluded these, and it was set and done and all that stuff. That's already been provenly false in the letter we have here. Just recently, we see that decisions can be overturned. We just did that with the Cake Road. I'm sure you remember these people who were saying, oh, we need to be an ally to the tribe in Cake because they apparently don't want this road. Okay, so you're going to be an ally to the tribes because you're good neighbors. Well, how about your neighbors here? Your neighbors here, not one town over, have been trying to get this for 49 years, and you are so quick to jump from being an ally to the tribe to demonizing them as privileged people. Oh, how privileged they can be. You don't even want to give them their own land back because it's valuable to you. I'm trying to calm down a little bit here. There was another comment made. Basically, I am very aware of the federal government's attempted erasure of the Native culture in general when the federal government took over Alaska. They started taking all the kids away and sending them to boarding schools to re-educate them because, well, they were taught wrong and needed to be re-educated on the proper ways. I believe this was in regards to the capitalism comment. The proper ways of being a civilized person. So when you have a culture that's basically does not really have a written language and it's all passed down verbally, and you remove all the children from that culture so they cannot learn anything from their grandparents until they come back after they've fully grown, yes, it has a huge detrimental effect on that culture. And as a result, now, almost 100 years later, there is a push to try and get some of what we remember of our culture back, which is why I go back to the tax credits on the carbon credits on the timber. We are very aware that clear cutting is a really bad idea. You have to have the old growth timber in order to get these things. I'm trying to, basically I was happy to not send any letter at all, not for or against, because I don't view this as an issue for the non-native members to be weighing in on, because it really, in my opinion, does not have anything to do, again, just like the road, with everybody else. That one was Borough. This one is between the tribe and the feds. And it's been a long time coming, and we finally got an actual legislation that they're actually going to look at. And it's kind of a big deal. But I did not want to send a letter in support or against, because I did not think that was right. Because I am aware that there are people in town who probably do not support this. And I didn't feel it was right to basically put words in their mouth and say that they did. That is what this body's supposed to do. And I know there's hard feelings on that, but I just, it's frankly irritating, and I know you're just asking for extra time, but I've seen these maps since December. That's plenty of time. They have opened it up to the public if you would like to amend these maps. They have done this. If anybody did not see these maps or did not look into them, I don't know what to tell you. But it's been a long time, and it's a little frustrating to me. Just all of these things. I'll let somebody else talk now. Chill out.
Any other Assembly members have comments? Member Mucci?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a point of clarification to Member Norheim. Are you a member of this Landless organization? I just want to get that out there first, and then I have a couple other questions I'm trying to sort out.
I would say that I am a tribal member, but since there's no organization that exists as of right now, and as far as I'm aware, if there was some kind of corporation made, I probably wouldn't have a high enough blood quantum, as far as I'm aware, to receive any kind of benefits, if there were any, but nobody's even spoken about if there were benefits attached to this thing. Okay. It sounded more like they were interested in community development, just like PIA or SEARCH or any of the other Native organizations that you thanked at the last meeting for offering free services. This is yet another tribal entity that is wanting to promote this community.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, I don't think, for me, it's not a question of, you know, I mean, if we want to talk about giving all the land back to the original stakeholders here, that's a bigger conversation. I think the concern that you're hearing is that the community has some concerns about parcels that are around Petersburg. You don't, I mean, if you look at the Thomas Bay map, there's some lands that are selected that kind of run along the road system in Thomas Bay that people use to access their cabins in Point Agassiz. You've heard comments from one or two members about, you know, Mitkoff Island access. We've heard comments about cabins in Portage Bay. You know, I don't think, for me, I'm not against the whole legislation, but I think there's some concerns in the community that need to kind of get addressed. I mean, we could certainly entertain a do-nothing approach here on this letter, but this letter here is just asking for some more time. I mean, it's like any other letter that we send out or legislation that we're asking for comments on. I think we need to give the community some time to look at these maps. I know the maps have been out there, but, you know, it's like anything else. You can only get on the website so many times before your eyes glaze over. And if we want to get buy-in from the community members here in Petersburg so that we can support this legislation. I think we need to kind of show the community that we're asking the questions about cabins and how that's all going to work out, the commercial and the non-commercial and the public access to all these. Earlier in the year during the moose hunting season when there was some COVID concerns in Cake, we were told that we were to avoid areas like that, and that was their home rule city, and so we kind of adjusted our schedules for that. And I think that's a concern for people. They don't want to be kept out of going to places that they've traditionally hunted. I know there's folks who've lived in these areas for thousands of years, but I think, we just need to make sure that the community has weighed in, and I'm not at that point that we all have weighed in yet. Thank you.
Any other Assembly members have comments? People that are on the phone line?
Yep. Yes, if I can, Mr. Mayor.
Member Lim, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. I share Member Mucci's concerns. When you look at it, there has been established patterns over the last 50 years, whether we like it or not. There's now more than the residents of Petersburg and around. Those patterns are important to them. And it was interesting to me to say that, well, we could have made changes in those maps, but I never felt the ability or any kind of a formal process where we went through or we could go through and say, yeah, we like this or don't like this. It was all individual. I would like to see what other people have to say. I think it's very important for the community to look at it. I think it's very important for this community to weigh in and to see where the consensus is and where it's not. Second, we asked, I think, some very legitimate questions to the congressional delegation, some legal questions. Some were answered, some weren't. But then that raised other questions of which probably need to be followed up on. And yeah, I understand it's been 49 years, but I think if you want something, we really need to have community buy-in. And that's kind of where I really do believe we need to send a letter. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Lynn. Member Tremblay or Member Kinsinger, do you have any input?
I would just like, yes, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
You may.
Yes, I feel a lot better. I agree with Member Lynn that there have been established patterns, and I'm heartened that the approach that they're planning on taking with this property is not simply go in and clear cut it and export logs in the ground overseas. But I guess I'd like to see something in writing or some statements. And then I guess I'd just like to ask another question. If you're trying to pick high-value timberland for carbon offset credits, why do you need to pick lands that are located next to log transfer facilities and on some of the most developed road systems that we have in the area? That's all.
Member Tremblay, do you have any interjection today?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to first thank the presenters of the presentation earlier in the meeting for all their time in response to this as well as leading up to this. Being almost 20 years younger than the process this legislation has been going through means that there's been a lot of learning on my part. And as somebody whose ancestors had their own journey across the Atlantic and multiple continents, taking time to learn about the long process of development and organization of this land itself has always been a lifelong journey for me. So I understand the role that we're playing as an assembly in sending this letter, and I'm sure that it will pass. I will be voting no against it because of the long-standing belief that I have in the merits of the moral issue of land back, given the history of this region and respect for the people originally on it. I consider this as part, we'll see what happens in D.C. We're not necessarily the most productive place right now. So we'll see what happens, but no matter what, I hope that this is a part of a long-standing conversation and dialogue between all parties, and I think everyone involved should be wanting transparency, participation, and open communication going forward about expectations. And so, again, I understand this letter is going to pass, and there's very, very good questions that are in the letter, so mine's kind of a symbolic no, just because I don't believe in asking for the delay as a moral issue for me personally. But I do hopefully get answers to those questions, and that, again, this will be part of an ongoing dialogue. I think that's it for me for comments so far. Thank you.
Any other follow-up comments? Member Norheim?
In regards to the public access to the land, in the email we received, it says public access is guaranteed. In the legislation, if you read it, it says public access is guaranteed. Nobody is going to be kept off of this land. I don't know why it keeps getting brought up over and over again when you're told over and over and over that nobody's going to be kept off this land. And even after the email we got, even after the presentation, the question is asked again, are we just like throwing this back out there? We're like, oh, well, they didn't tell us. No, I didn't hear that part. Do you hear this part? Nobody is going to be kept off this land. That's not what we do. The tribe here is far too mixed race at this point to be picking and choosing who can and cannot be let on this land. Nobody's going to lose their hunting spots, their fishing spots. Nobody wants to cut down and clear cut anything. As far as why, looking at, as far as I know, Portage Bay, why that area was picked, as I said, we're basically getting leftovers at this point. Is there a log facility there? Yeah, there is. There's one in a lot of places. Is there one over in Thomas Bay? No. Is there one in the middle of the island over here? No. Is there one over there where they picked across the Narrows? No. So that seems kind of like a red herring. You're just trying to pick and choose something that, well, what about this? I don't know. I can't explain it. Maybe it's just what was left over there. But again, nobody is going to be kept off this land. It's going to be for the tribe and for everybody. That's the point. You can't, I could only imagine the kind of backlash around here is if the tribe picked up this land and said, nope, it's just ours. You're not allowed to go there anymore. I mean, you would make a lot of people real mad, and that would really not go over well. And what around town here, from the native corporations, as you said, free COVID tests, trying to promote the town and the community. How much support and free stuff does everybody have to get from the native corporations around here for you to believe us when we say, you can go to the land. We don't want to ruin anything. This is a great place, and we would like to keep it that way, and we'd like to keep promoting the community in positive ways. I just don't know how many times we can say it. One last time. Nobody will be kept off this land. Nobody's clear-cutting anything. The tribe would love to keep promoting positive things in this community. Do not send this letter, please.
Okay, with all Assembly members having commented, I'll interject my thoughts. I view this land selection the land selected a little different than what happened in 1971. And like Ms. Lopez Valero stated earlier, a lot has changed since 71, and it has. But if you look at the land selected, it all has infrastructure on it. And this is not just the Petersburg land selection, it's all the way from up, and I'm assuming it's the Timothy or the Haynes selection, all the way from Berners Bay, all the way down to the selections that the Ketchikan area made. And then most of their lands that they selected is over on Prince of Wales Island, and it all has federally paid for infrastructure. So that is, kind of an issue for me. And along with that train of thought, last Friday was the first time that we got a firm answer from John Crowther, from Senator Murkowski's office, that log transfer facilities, marine access facilities, Forest Service cabins that were in these lands selected will be transferred to the urban corporations. They do not have to keep them open to the public. They belong to them. As far as access to the land, there is provisions in this bill that says they will provide access to this land with reasonable restrictions. And that wasn't, really explained clearly. It can't be explained. What's a reasonable restriction? That can mean many things in my mind. So as far as corporations, probably have a board of directors. They make the decisions what they want to do with the land for development. In Petersburg specific, they will not only get $2.5 million with their 23,000 acres to start up their corporation, they will get infrastructure in Portage Bay worth millions of dollars. And I'm talking about administration site, West Point cabin, and the cabin up by Stop Island. And it's been said that yes, everybody will be allowed on the land, but there's a provision right in this bill that would allow restrictions, reasonable restrictions. I'm going to bring up an instance that happened to me and my son and one of his friends a few years back. Hobart Bay, lands owned by Gold Belt Corporation. They have a watchman there. Pulled up to the dock. We just wanted to tie up just to, stretch our legs. There's signs, no trespassing. The watchman came down and said, you can't get on our land. And that's happened in other regions of the state. Talked to a gentleman here that drew a tag for hunting up in the interior. So he was all excited about it, hunted on that land before. And since the last time he was up there, I don't know who has ownership of it, but it's some native entity. And he was sent a letter by that entity saying, congratulations on receiving your tag, there's a $2,500 fee. So he didn't go hunting. So I think we need to send this letter. I don't think it's going to stop the legislation from moving forward. I think what we're asking here is just to have time for the public communities to have some input. I was never involved in anything to do with any of this land selection or saw any of that moving forward. I understand Rangel and Craig are also expressing concerns, and there's a hearing on the Energy Committee in an hour back in Washington, D.C. to address this. No public input. So that's why I felt it necessary to send some communication from our borough to, and it does affect all the residents of this area, people from down south, even people from other countries that come and use the recreation cabin. So without repeating myself, that's it. That's my concern. I will be voting in favor of this letter. Member Mucci?
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
One more follow-up, and then we'll move on.
Sure. No, Member Norheim mentioned that, he wasn't going to vote in favor of this letter. I mean, is there a different version that you'd like to see, or some amendments to this letter that you'd like to see that would help you get on board here, or you just for principle reason that you're just not comfortable with the letter? I'm just trying to sort out if there's a way we could have some comments on here to move this letter forward, asking for some time to, get our public comments together. I'm just trying to sort out what you're thinking. That's all.
Thank you. I know we discussed that and made amendments at Monday's meeting. So is there any other comments or short follow-ups by assembly members?
Did he want to answer?
Yeah.
at this point, I'm sure you're aware of my opinion on sending letters. Like I said, I was happy not sending a letter. I was happy if this letter didn't go. Saying you're for it or against it, in my opinion, would be putting words in the mouth of people who are either for or against it in account. So if you send this letter, or sorry, not this letter, the letter as presented, you are representing everybody in this town, including the tribal members who want this, and saying, no, they don't want this, which would be a lie. If you sent a letter that was for this, yes, we want this, then you would be misrepresenting Mr. B. Knight, and there must be other people who share her opinion. The mayor has a different reason why he does not want this to go forward right now, and that would be a misrepresentation of those people. I understand the whole, we have to make tough choices for the good of the community and all that, but I don't think it's right to speak for people. It's why I like individuals to send their letters, or something that could be like truly, radically unified against. I understand the concerns and all that, but no, I guess stop rambling. I do not have amendments to the letter. I would be happy if no letter was sent. It's just, I don't really believe that it's the place of the assembly to speak for people over a topic that clearly has some people who are very against it would probably be really offended if we sent letters for or against something.
Okay, thank you, Member Norheim. Member Lynn, Tremblay, or Kinsinger, do you have any more comments before we take a vote on this?
No, thank you.
Okay, I'm not hearing any input.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
I don't view this letter as taking a position for other people. I view this letter as saying, let's just pump the brakes a little bit. I don't feel there's been enough public input. I'm not saying, I'm not making a decision, not voting for this letter to make a decision for anybody, pro or con, to this land transfer. It's just to allow individuals, hopefully, like Member Norheim said, to send emails for this legislation or against this legislation to our congressional delegation. So that's my input for supporting this letter. So with that being said, unless someone has something that just popped up that they want to say, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Chelsea?
No.
Taylor?
No.
Jeff?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we will send this letter to the Energy Committee here directly, and we'll send it to Senators Murkowski and Sullivan, Congressman Young, Murkowski and Sullivan's representative in Ketchikan, Sherry Klein. We should send a copy to her, and we'll see where it goes. So with that being said, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Second.
Aye.
Aye. We're now adjourned. Time to go to the AML meeting. You done that all, Jeff?